On this episode of the Story Detective, we're going to be exploring the catalyst that changed what might have been an ordinary existence into a career in which I got to partake in the history of many comic book superheroes. It's a moment I remember well, and it all began with Spiderman. It's a true story, and none of the names have been changed to protect anybody. So, don't touch that dial. Grab yourself a drink, get a snack, kick back, because I've got a story to tell. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to tell you about the Evergreen Writing Oasis. It's a virtual retreat where I'll be participating with a whole lot of other AuthorTube personalities. It's happening the week of July 19th, right at the end of that notorious second week of Camp NaNoWriMo, when the creative juices begin to wane. A perfect way to recharge your writing motivation. And don't forget to check out their merch store. This event is free, fun, and absolutely time well spent. Hope to see you there. Whenever I hear people say they didn't choose their career, it chose them, I know exactly what they mean. I was without direction in life. I had no reason to be looking for one. I was 2 years old, gazing out at the world I barely understood through the wooden slats of a crib. Or maybe it was a playpen. I don't exactly remember. I think it was a crib. I won't pretend to know if I was more aware than the average 2-year-old, and certainly I can't recall every detail of my life at the time. However, I can recall with brilliant clarity the moment I was chosen. On that particular day, I was at my grandmother's house, plopped in my crib, and left alone in the living room in front of a relic of a television, one of those old wooden consoles, complete with tuning knobs and tubes for guts, watching afternoon cartoons. I can't remember why I was left alone in the room that day, but my grandmother went off to her kitchen. Maybe a meal needed to be prepped, or she was having coffee with a visitor at the kitchen table, as she often did in those days. Baby monitors didn't exist yet. There was a large dining room and 2 walls between me and my grandmother. And while a baby left alone is not the most original setup for a story, a child in potential danger is certainly something that captures an audience's attention every time. Because any number of things might have occurred in which Grandma would not have been immediately aware, and something did. The concrete, which formed the foundation the rest of my life would be built upon, was about to be poured. The thing that no one could have foreseen, what caught my attention that afternoon, was unlike anything I ever witnessed during my limited span on Earth. A man who wore a red and blue costume took possession of the glass screen flickering before me. He clung to walls and was armed with web shooters attached to his wrists that subdued his adversaries. He also used his webs to swing high above the rooftops of Manhattan. What did I know of large cities and skyscrapers? We lived in mid-state New York, surrounded by dairy farms. I did, however, understand Spider-Man had a mission above and beyond any character in the cartoons which were paraded before me. I wanted to see more, reaching for what seemed exceptional drama for a 2-year-old. Had my grandmother or parents known what this cartoon awakened, even if some foresighted individual told them I would eventually work for Marvel Comics and contribute to the history of this character, they would have turned that television off in fearful haste and directed my attention elsewhere. All that was to come later, when I was old enough to start making life choices for myself that didn't fit with the preconceived notions others envisioned for my life. Little did they suspect, nor was I able to articulate, I had already been bitten, not by a radioactive spider, but by a concept that touched such a rudimentary level of understanding that even a 2-year-old was captivated. We are all on a quest for something in this life. Our passions dictate our goals, and our goals are formed by several things. Our circumstances, especially those we're born into, inform who we eventually become. What piques our curiosity in the form of escapism, hobbies, whatever outlet we funnel our energy into during those formative years is also a factor. not having a healthy outlet can be a different sort of indicator. What eventually happens when all that bottled up energy has nowhere to go? Psychologically, we become what we feed our brains, or what others feed into it. The struggle between noble dreams and past programming are always at odds. Heroes and villains, in fiction as in life, are formed by whatever their psyches have ingested. The best heroes have a lot to overcome, both in their exterior physical battles and within themselves. I was 8 or 9 years old when I graduated from cartoons to reading my first Spider-Man comic book. At that age, we pick our favorite superheroes and back them like people get behind sports teams. And so it was Spidey who turned me into an avid reader from that point onward. Maybe not so coincidentally, I read my first novel later that same year. It was To Kill a Mockingbird, which is an entirely different subject. Would I have bothered to pick up that particular book had I not enjoyed reading and became curious? Later that same year, I read a classic Western novel, Shane, then Paper Moon, and a novelization of the first Star Wars before I ever saw the film. Comic books taught me the joy of reading, and more to the point, a deeper fascination with stories and character. They also taught me some things about conflict, externally and emotionally. In comics, when superheroes first meet, they usually clash. Sometimes this happens simply because there's too much testosterone present. Other times, there might be a misunderstanding, or differences in opinion on how a major problem might be solved. But there's never any doubt in the mind of a comic book fan that members of the same team can and should generate conflict, a lesson all writers would do well to remember. And while supervillains might be plotting to destroy their city, maybe even the entire planet, most superheroes need to get past themselves, their own egos and hang-ups first. In fiction, as in life, there is a subtext fueling our actions. We face this duality on almost every level of existence. There's how what we think and feel versus how everyone we encounter thinks and feels. What's done to us versus what we do about those actions and circumstances. Even our goals and intentions versus the pressure we feel and apply, or is applied by others. Because whatsoever we push against, even with our interior emotions, causes an equal and opposing resistance. That's the law of physics at work. It's also the law of conflict and where it originates. Simply put, our experiences create our inner psychology, and that creates reactionary responses to everything we come in contact with in our outer world that presses those emotional buttons. Reading Spider-Man's adventures certainly pressed mine. What soon followed was my fascination with the character, combining with my love of stories, soon turned into a pressing need to write and draw my own stories. But make no mistake, it was the characterization which set Spider-Man apart from some other comic book stories I read, because he was very flawed. Peter Parker had a lot of hang-ups, and watching his struggles made him very real, sometimes a little too real. And we're going to take a look at the elements that made him very unique to comic books in his day, and continue to set him apart from many in the superhero genre since. That's what we'll be talking about next time. Until then, keep those keyboards clacking.